Welcome to Legacy Black Power. 21 older black celebrities who are LGBTQ+, that you didn't know about, Part 2. For decades, being LGBT in the world of entertainment meant climbing a mountain with no peak in sight. But for black LGBT artists, it wasn't just a fight, it was a life sentence. Picture a transgender singer forced to live as a man for 40 years, just to be allowed on stage. Or imagine a music icon who sank into depression after one brutal article exposed his truth. Weeks later, he was found alone in a hotel room. The headlines called it a stroke. His family called it a fall from grace. And that's only the beginning. Because today, for the very first time, we're pulling back the curtain on 21 black R&B legends, artists who lit up a world with their brilliance but were never free to fully be themselves. Their stories are filled with talent, heartbreak, and silences that lasted far too long. So stay with us until the very end. And if any of these stories leave you speechless, drop a comment below. Because your voice today might be the only thing keeping their truth alive and their memories from being buried forever. Little Richard, the king of pretend. They called him the father of rock and roll. The first black man bold enough to step on stage in high heels. Little Richard. Face glowing, style flamboyant, voice wild enough to set a room ablaze. To the world, he was freedom personified. But behind the glitter, Richard spent a lifetime borrowing against himself, concealing the man he truly was. Born into a strict religious household in Georgia, he paid dearly for being different. As a boy, his father nearly beat him to death for wearing makeup and singing in a high-pitched voice. Deep down, Richard already knew he loved men. But in a world where being gay was branded a sin, he chose silence. He chose performance. Even at the peak of his fame, when Tutti Frutti and Long Tall Sally shook the charts, Richard never lived like other men. On stage, he bragged he was sexual dynamite. Off stage, he buried his truth. In 1956, during a tour, a young assistant sat with him in a hotel room. Their eyes locked. Hands trembled, a moment of forbidden fire. 15 minutes later, Richard walked out and told everyone the boy was just his cousin. That fleeting first love died as quickly as it was born, smothered under silence. He switched hotels, replaced assistants, and never spoke of it again. Years later, when age dimmed his once soaring voice, Richard returned to the pulpit. He called homosexuality a sin, repenting for the very love he had once ached for. Fans were left stunned. How could a man who lived so fearlessly try to erase his own flame? But maybe that contradiction was survival. In the 1950s, being black, being famous, and being gay meant honesty could feel like a death sentence. Little Richard passed in 2020, leaving behind a legacy no one can deny. Yet what makes him unforgettable isn't just the music. It's a quiet, unspoken plea for forgiveness, not from God, but from the pieces of himself he spent a lifetime denying, because all of us carry a fragile side. And if Little Richard taught us anything, it's that compassion begins when we stop judging the pain others hide. Johnny Mathis, the silent lover. In the golden era of the 1950s, when crooners ruled the airwaves and teenage hearts, Johnny Mathis stood above them all. His voice was liquid velvet, his face boyish yet alluring, and his eyes carried a quiet sorrow, as if guarding secrets the world wasn't ready to hear. And he was born in 1935 to a working-class black family in San Francisco. Johnny grew up shy, withdrawn, and utterly devoted to music. But even as a boy, he sensed he was different. While his classmates bragged about blonde crushes pinned to locker doors, Johnny's gaze drifted elsewhere, to the tall boy whose laughter seemed to echo inside him. Fame found him young. At just 22, chances are made him a CBS darling, and suddenly, oceans of women pressed against the stage, flooding him with flowers, letters, and adoration. Yet in the middle of this hysteria, Johnny often felt like an intruder in his own story. Once, during a stop in Chicago, he slipped away from his hotel at 2 a.m. to meet a man from the sound crew. For 3 hours, they sat in a parked car, sharing truths Johnny had never dared to speak. At one point, Johnny confessed he had never even held a hand of someone he truly loved. The man stared in disbelief, but Johnny meant every word. For decades, he lived this double life. In 1982, He briefly admitted in an interview that he was gay, but the backlash forced the truth to be buried again. It wasn't until 2017, at 82 years old, that he finally spoke openly about who he was. His words were soft, trembling, and drenched in the weight of years spent hiding. Through 6 decades of music, Mathis never married, never courted scandal, never explained himself. He sang love songs that defined romance for millions, while he himself loved in silence. To the world, he was the voice of passion and intimacy. Yet behind every ballad was a man longing for a love as simple, as ordinary, as anyone else's. Open, unashamed, and free from fear. Johnny Mathis's story endures as a quiet ache, a reminder of all the hearts that live half hidden. And it leaves us with one haunting question. How many must spend a lifetime whispering their truth, waiting for the day they can finally call their love by its true name? Jackie Shane, a voice from a place too mysterious to name. To many, she wasn't just a singer. She was a living pulse of a boundless soul. On stage, with ruby red lips, a towering wig, and eyeliner drawn like armor, she ruled the stage like the undisputed queen of the 1960s. But what shook Toronto wasn't just that velvet voice or the fire in her eyes. It was a haunting question. Who was Jackie Shane? A man, a woman, or someone who dared to exist beyond every label? Born in Nashville in 1940, Jackie was raised in a world thick with poverty, prejudice, and fear. Her mother saw it early. Her child was different. While other boys swung bats and chased balls, Jackie gravitated toward dresses, dolls, and Billie Holiday records. Her father's silence spoke louder than words, his eyes carrying judgment she could never escape. Jackie would later admit, "I learned to lie before I learned to read." Because in her world, the truth wasn't just dangerous, it could get you killed. As a teenager, Jackie ran. She crossed the border into Canada, chasing freedom in Toronto's smoky soul clubs. There, she transformed into a phenomenon, with a voice like fire and a presence that bent the room to her will. She became an underground icon for Black LGBTQ communities long before the world had a name for it. Yet, under the glitter lived heartbreak. In 1963, she fell for a sound engineer, a love both tender and dangerous. One night, while Jackie powdered her face backstage, his mother walked in, looked her up and down, and said coldly, "I don't know what my son is in love with." 3 days later, he vanished. No goodbye, no explanation, only silence, and the wound never closed. Not long after, Jackie slipped from the stage into the shadows. For 40 years, she lived in seclusion, as if the world had entombed her while still alive. No concerts, no interviews, no trace. Only in 2010, when her old recordings resurfaced, did the search for Jackie Shane begin again. By then, she was living quietly in a tiny Nashville apartment. No family, no friends, no lover beside her. When asked why she disappeared, she gave only a gentle smile. "I didn't want to keep pretending to be someone I'm not." When Jackie passed, tributes poured in from a new generation of artists. They didn't call her transgender. They didn't just call her a legend. They called her what she truly was, someone who dared to live, if only for a moment, as her authentic self. And maybe that's the most any of us can hope for, that fleeting chance to live without fear. If the world can't embrace that truth, then the least we can do is honor Jackie Shane by telling her story. Because sometimes the greatest act of kindness is simply listening, really listening, to another person's pain without judgment. Marlena Shaw, the woman who carried her secret to the grave. There was always an air of mystery around Marlena. Whether she lit up the stage with sun-drenched California soul or broke hearts with aching jazz ballads, her voice felt like a confession, raw, private, almost as if she was singing from two lives at once. She never chased scandal, never offered bold declarations. Yet she never denied either, and in that silence, the question lingered. Who was she really? Born in 1942 in New Rochelle, New York, Marlena grew up in a family where music filled the home but tradition ruled the table. One afternoon in high school, her mother found a folded note addressed to a girl named Lorraine. The words were tender, too tender to be dismissed as simple friendship. That evening, Marlena was called to the kitchen. Her mother held up the note, and asked quietly, "Who do you think you are?" No shouting, no punishment, just silence. A silence that cut deeper than any scolding. Marlena never spoke of Lorraine again. Her family said nothing. And a love that could never be named drifted into the shadows of her life. Unspoken, unforgiven. By 1969, after Woman of the Ghetto made her a voice of defiance and power for black women, Marlena began performing at LGBT shows. Yet she never claimed a label. When pressed, she'd only smile and say, "I love someone who loves me." In 1974, during a recording session, a female engineer slipped her a note. "Thanks for the hug yesterday." To fans, that fragile scrap of paper was one of the few glimpses into her hidden world. There were no photos, no public hand-holding, no tabloid leaks. And maybe that was why she was admired so deeply, because she never needed to explain herself. Her presence was enough. When Marlena passed in 2023, tributes poured in by the thousands. Some called her a spiritual mother. Others remembered her as a quiet symbol for those forced to love in silence. And a few wrote simply, "At last, she can love without fear." Marlena Shaw's life reminds us that living well doesn't always mean revealing everything. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is refuse to be ashamed of who you are, even if you never speak it out loud. Carl Bean, the pastor born to be different. Carl Bean's journey began not with applause, but with rejection. At just 13, he was thrown out of his church choir. Not because he couldn't carry a note, but because he carried it too deeply, too passionately. The sting of laughter from grown adults cut into him like a wound that never fully healed. Carl adored music. He adored the church, but the church never seemed to adore him back. Born in Baltimore in 1944, Carl dreamed of becoming a gospel star, but destiny had other plans. The world of soul and disco opened its doors, and with one groundbreaking anthem, "I Was Born This Way," he carved his name into history. It wasn't just a song. It was a declaration, a defiant prayer set to rhythm. I was born this way, and I have no regrets. But in the 1970s, being openly gay in the black music scene was almost unthinkable. Carl didn't make an announcement. He let the music speak. His family had always known, but silence ruled the house, and Carl learned to keep his truth unspoken. He feared losing the one thing he still clung to, his faith. And yet, love still found him. His first romance was with a young man named Marcus from that same choir. They'd linger after service, pretending to study scripture, when really all they wanted was another stolen glance. One night, Marcus placed his hand on Carl's. No words, just a quiet connection. But when the senior pastor walked in, everything shattered. Marcus was suspended. Carl was spared, but warned over and over to sing like a man. He got the message. He buried the pain and poured it into every note he sang. And still he sang. Years later, Carl left the spotlight and did something far more radical. He built a church of his own. The Unity Fellowship Church became a sanctuary for LGBTQ people of color who had been cast aside by traditional congregations. For the first time, they were embraced, blessed, and told they were holy. When Carl passed in 2021, the world didn't just lose an artist. It lost a man who dared to stand against family, society, and even religion itself, just to live with dignity. Carl Bean proved something profound. You don't always have to shout who you are. Sometimes, simply living long enough, strong enough, and true enough is the loudest sermon of all. Nona Hendryx, the woman who refused to bow. While others lowered their voices and shortened their skirts to fit the market's mold, Nona Hendryx stormed the stage like a lightning bolt, neon pink hair blazing, thigh-high boots striking, and eyes sharp enough to cut steel. She wasn't there to entertain. She was there to wake the world up. Born in 1944, Nona rose to fame with the trailblazing group LaBelle, forever remembered for their defiant anthem Lady Marmalade. But before she became an icon of feminism and gay pride, she was just a little girl afraid of the dark. Not the kind with monsters, but the kind filled with judging eyes inside her own home. At 10, she already knew she was drawn to women. Sitting beside her best friend in class, she felt a spark she couldn't name. Whenever she stared too long at a pretty girl on TV, her mother would switch the channel. when she chose soccer over ballet. Her father's side said everything. No blows, no bruises, but no hugs either. Silence became her only shelter. Her first love was Teresa, a stage designer 7 years older. They hid their relationship so carefully that friends thought they were cousins. Until one night in Detroit, when a bandmate opened a wrong door and caught them in an embrace. By morning, Teresa was gone, fired for breaking group discipline. That night, Nona sang with a smile as if nothing had happened, but inside she understood the cost. To love openly was to risk losing everything. And still, she refused to bow. Launching her solo career, she poured her fury and her freedom into music and activism, standing tall with the LGBT community. When asked to define herself, she dismissed the question with a single bold line: "I love whoever makes me feel free." Today, Nona Hendryx mentors young queer artists not through speeches or headlines, but by living unapologetically out loud. Her presence alone is a manifesto. In a world that demands masks, she reminds us that authenticity itself is rebellion. Beverly Glenn-Copeland, the man who had no name. Some people spend half their lives searching for themselves. Beverly Glenn-Copeland was one of them. Born a black girl in Philadelphia in 1944, he entered a world that didn't even have a word for who he was. No one told him what it meant to be transgender. No one told him it was possible to live as himself. He began as a folk singer, eventually moving to McGill University in Canada, a rare place where he could finally exhale. His music didn't follow the rules. Rooted in R&B and jazz, Glenn blended electronic soundscapes with meditation, weaving together traditions no one thought belonged in the same breath. But in those early years, he still performed as Beverly. Outwardly, he was a woman. Inwardly, he had always been a man. His family felt the difference. Once, his mother discovered letters tucked under his pillow, written to a classmate. She didn't tear them up. She didn't scold him. Instead, she placed a Bible on the table and whispered, "You can stop praying, but don't let anyone else know." Quiet words with heavy meaning. Permission to be himself, but only in the shadows. At McGill, Glenn's first great love was a dance student named Sophie. Their relationship was a secret. 2 years of stolen glances and quiet embraces. Until one night, a teacher caught them backstage. By morning, Sophie was reassigned to another class. Glenn wasn't expelled, but the message was clear. Stay small, stay silent. He was never chosen for a leading role again. For decades, Glenn lived publicly as a woman. Only in his 50s and the early 2000s did he finally claim his truth as a transgender man. He married Elizabeth, a woman who saw him fully without needing explanations. Their love wasn't just a marriage. It was living proof of acceptance. And when Glenn shared his truth with the world, the response wasn't just applause. It was relief. At last, his name matched his soul. Now at 80, Glenn rarely sings, but he speaks. He shares his journey with young people still lost in their search for self. He doesn't posture as an inspiration. He simply is. And somehow, that's more powerful. When he walks on stage, people feel a weight lift, as if someone whispered for them, "I am who I am." Sometimes it takes half a lifetime to say a single true sentence. But when it finally arrives, it has the power to set others free. Because at the end of the day, all any of us really need is permission to live exactly as we were born to be. Gaye Adegbalola, the woman who sings straight from her soul. In the world of the blues, few voices dare to carry the raw truth the way hers does. Gaye doesn't just sing. She pours herself into every note, every lyric, every memory of love and pain. She never wore a mask, not even when honesty cost her the approval of her own family. Born in 1944 in Fredericksburg, Virginia, she grew up in a time when racism and sexism pressed down like heavy chains. Her mother, a music teacher, dreamed of a polished, proper daughter. But Gaye refused to fit the mold. She spoke loudly, dressed boldly, and strummed her guitar with a fire people thought belonged only to men. That defiance got her expelled from her high school band, her spirit dismissed as unladylike. Her mother also knew another truth, the secret inside Gaye's heart. One afternoon, she discovered a love letter written in purple ink, addressed to a girl named Lydia. It ended with a line that could never be forgotten. "If loving you is wrong, then I don't want to be right." Her mother didn't yell, didn't cry. She simply placed a letter back on Gaye's desk with quiet plea, "Please, save face with this family." That romance with Lydia soon collapsed. At a birthday party, when Gaye dared to brush a kiss across Lydia's cheek, Lydia recoiled. By the next day, she was gone. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence that cut deeper than words. But heartbreak didn't break Gaye. It lit a fire. She channeled that pain into power, becoming a founding member of Sapphire, the uppity blues women, a band that carved its name into feminist circles and the LGBTQ community. In 1992, at a time when most artists stayed silent, Gaye stood tall and came out publicly as gay, one of the first black musicians to risk it all for truth. Instead of abandoning her, fans rallied behind her. They loved her because she never pretended. As she once declared, "I don't just love women, I love freedom." Today, Gaye lives quietly in Virginia with her longtime partner. No stage photo ops, no need for rings. Just coffee in the morning, a soft blues line humming in the background, and love that asks for no permission. For her, one person's understanding is more than enough. Through her music and her life, Gaye Adegbalola has proven that authenticity isn't a luxury, it's a right. She reminds us that true kindness means allowing others to live as they are. And by that measure, Gaye has been kind all her life, by singing her truth, by refusing to hide, and by daring to live out loud. Billy Preston, the genius who never dared to love. On stage, his hands were fire, keys blurred beneath his fingers, summoning music so powerful that even the Beatles and Ray Charles rose in awe. Fans crowned him the fifth Beatle, a man whose sound could lift souls straight out of their bodies. Yet when the lights dimmed and the applause faded, Billy retreated into silence, a man terrified of being truly seen. Born in Houston in 1946, Billy's first stage was a church. By 3, he was strumming guitar. By 6, his brilliance was undeniable. But he grew up in a world where being black meant struggle, and being gay meant exile. His home was ruled by strict religion, his family unwavering in its judgment. One day, his mother found him in the garage, embracing the boy he loved. Her words cut sharper than any knife. "God doesn't make sick." That wound never closed. On the road, Billy found a fleeting connection with a young drummer from Philadelphia. They ate together, practiced together, their eyes carrying a language no one else could read. But in Atlanta, it collapsed. The band manager, suspicious of noises behind a locked door, came knocking. Panicked, Billy shoved him out, trembling as he lied, "I don't know what he's doing here." And just like that, his first love ended. Not by betrayal of the heart, but by betrayal born of fear. The rest of his life, Billy stayed in the shadows. In the music world, many knew, but no one spoke it aloud. He buried his truth beneath drugs, alcohol, and nights that stretched into emptiness. By the time he died in 2006 from liver and kidney failure, the world celebrated his genius. But those who loved him remembered the sadness in his eyes whenever he stepped off stage. Because courage isn't always shouting the truth. Sometimes it's surviving in silence, pressing the keys while every note carries the weight of pain. Billy Preston deserved love, not just for his music, but for the life he lived in chains, denied the simple chance to be himself. Sylvester, the disco queen of darkness. There was no one like Sylvester. On stage, he was a force of nature, unshackled, untamed, and unapologetically himself. He danced in a universe where gender had no rules, his falsetto soaring higher than most men would ever dare. Draped in flowing skirts, nails painted, earrings catching the spotlight. Sylvester wasn't just about glitter or glamour. What people carried with him was his courage, the audacity to live out loud in a world that demanded his silence. Born in 1947 in Los Angeles, Sylvester grew up the youngest in a strict Christian household. His mother once punished him for hours, forcing him to kneel simply because he draped her scarf around his neck and sang along to Mahalia Jackson. From the very beginning, he knew he was different. In church, he fell for the boys in the choir, desires he never spoke aloud, knowing the cost could be everything. His first love was James, a dancer in a tiny San Francisco club. Together they carved out a fragile little world, a ground-floor apartment lit by purple bulbs with only a bed in the center. It was tender, it was fearless, and it was dangerous. One night, after a show, strangers cornered them in a parking lot, hurling slurs and stones. Sylvester threw himself in front of James, blood spilling down his face. And still, the very next night, he stepped back onto the stage and sang like nothing could break him. The world called him crazy. He never bowed. When AIDS began tearing through the LGBT community, Sylvester gave away his royalties to help the sick. And when he himself was diagnosed with HIV, he didn't hide. From a stage, he once proclaimed, "If I'm going to die, at least let me die in a velvet dress and applause." In 1988, at just 41 years old, Sylvester left this world. Some whispered relief. Others wept. But what lingered wasn't his death, it was his life. The memory of a man who dared to love, dared to suffer, and dared to live without disguise. So if the world ever turns its back on you for being different, remember Sylvester. Remember the gentleness of his music and the fire in his soul. And know this was only one story. There were others, stars who buried their truths just to stand beneath the lights, voices that sang through pain, faces that lived in fear. 11 more stories remain untold. Who were they? And why was the truth forced into silence for so long? And one haunting question: if they had been white, would the world have forgiven them? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Tillery, the voice that carried both fire and silence. From her earliest days with the Loading Zone, she refused to bend to anyone's idea of what she should be. Funk and soul weren't just music to her. They were breath itself, raw and unapologetic, pulsing straight from her core. But behind that fearless stage presence was a woman terrified that her truth might one day be exposed to the people closest to her. Born in 1948 to a working-class family in the San Francisco Bay Area, Linda grew up in a home heavy with unspoken rules. One day, her mother found her clipping pictures of women from magazines and tucking them inside her Bible. No confrontation followed, just silence. But from then on, every glance, every pause in the room, carried an unspoken verdict. Linda knew, her mother knew, and together, they chose silence as punishment. Her first love was a modern dancer, a spark that lit backstage during performance. The two were inseparable until one stolen kiss in the shadows was spotted. By sunrise, her lover had been quietly reassigned, pushed out of the spotlight as if she had never existed. Linda never spoke of it aloud. Instead, her music became her confession. Louder, sharper, vibrating with the fury of all she couldn't say. When Linda finally came out as gay, she offered no explanations, no pleas for understanding. She simply said, "I love someone and I didn't see anything wrong with it." It was her truth, naked and unapologetic. Today, Linda lives in quiet authenticity. She never married, but pours her soul into teaching and guiding the next generation of musicians. Her life proves that peace isn't always the prize at the end of a battle. It can be the quiet reward for those brave enough to live in rhythm with their truth, even after years of being silenced. Phyllis Hyman, the voice of wounds that never healed. Phyllis Hyman carried a beauty that felt almost supernatural, haunting, unforgettable. Her eyes told stories of sorrow. Her velvet voice could quiet a room, and the way she stood motionless before singing felt like she was reaching for words buried deep in her soul. She wasn't just a soul diva. She was a living embodiment of love denied, of truth forced into silence. Born in 1949 in Philadelphia, Phyllis grew up in a crowded home ruled by a strict father and softened only by her mother's quiet endurance. As a teenager, her world shifted in an instant. A cousin caught her holding hands with her best friend. No words were spoken, but everything changed. Suddenly, she wasn't allowed sleepovers anymore. Instead, she was sent away to a seminary for 2 long years, her innocence treated like a crime. Her first real love came in New York, a lounge singer whose presence steadied her. Their romance was tender, fragile, and hidden in the shadows. But fame knocked on her door and he slipped away. Years later, an ex-lover called her in tears. unable to bear the sight of her kissing another man on stage. Phyllis never answered. She answered the only way she knew how, with a song, a midnight apology, written in heartbreak, that the world would never hear. Whispers followed her everywhere. Affairs with men, affairs with women. She never confirmed, never denied. To the public, she was the classic loner of soul music. But behind the myth was a woman who only wanted what seemed impossible, love without judgment, without chains. When Phyllis died in 1995 of a drug overdose, the headlines pointed to a fading career, to despair. But those who truly knew her understood the deeper truth. Her greatest sorrow wasn't losing the spotlight. It was never being free to love and be loved the way her heart longed for. No one should have to die hiding love. And no one should have to live in silence just to make the world comfortable. Arnold McCuller, the voice behind the lights and the silence. Arnold McCuller may not be a household name, but you've almost certainly heard him. For decades, his voice soared just behind the stars, giving depth to the music of James Taylor, Phil Collins, and countless others. He was a soul hiding in the harmony, the echo that made legends shine brighter. Yet while his voice reached millions, Arnold himself remained in the shadows, on stage and in life. Born in Cleveland in 1950, Arnold grew up in a strict Catholic household where tenderness had no place. His father dismissed music as sentimental nonsense. When he discovered a picture of an actor tucked in young Arnold's wallet, he tossed it into the fire and growled, "Not in this house." At 15, Arnold already knew who he was. He was gay, but in that house, truth had no voice. His first taste of love came years later on the road, with a bandmate who made him laugh, who showed him kindness he'd never known. For a fleeting moment, it was freedom, but freedom has a price. A stolen kiss backstage, a watchful lighting tech, and by morning his lover was gone, fired without a word. Arnold stayed. His voice didn't falter, but it changed. The warmth dulled. The distance lingered. For years, he carried on like that, hidden, careful, silent. Then in the 90s, Arnold quietly reclaimed himself. No headlines, no speeches, just a stage, a song, and his partner walking proudly beside him. The crowd didn't jeer. They didn't turn away. They nodded, as if to say, "We see you." In the back, an elderly man leaned toward his friend and whispered, "If only he'd done this sooner, maybe I wouldn't have felt so alone." Arnold never asked for applause for his truth. He didn't need to. All he ever wanted was to sing, and to live honestly, because not every story is about glory. Sometimes it's about courage. The courage to step out of the darkest corner of the stage and say, "This is who I am." Luther Vandross, the silent symbol of a hidden heart. Luther Vandross wasn't just a singer. He was the very soundtrack of love. His velvet smooth voice carried the kind of tenderness that made millions believe he was speaking directly to them. Every ballad felt like a whispered confession, every note a promise of devotion. But behind the microphone, Luther's own truth remained unspoken. He could never openly sing to the person he truly loved. Born in 1951, raised in a working-class New York home, Luther stepped into manhood early after his father's death. To the world, he looked like the perfect son, the man destined for marriage and family. Yet those closest to him knew the secret he carried. Luther was gay, and silence became his shield. At glamorous Beverly Hills gatherings, he was sometimes seen with a quiet companion, a man the world would dismiss as just part of the staff, but who, to Luther, meant everything. When pressed by the media, Luther would smile softly and call him an old friend. In truth, it was a love story written in the shadows, a nearly decade-long bond that survived only in stolen moments, hidden letters, and quiet devotion. In 2003, tragedy struck when a stroke dimmed that radiant voice. 2 years later, Luther was gone, leaving behind timeless music, an unmatched legacy, and one haunting question. How could a man who sang so beautifully about love never be free to live his own? To this day, Luther is remembered as a silent symbol, not for lack of courage, but for the grace with which he carried his truth. He chose kindness over scandal, shouldering loneliness so that others would never feel discomfort. And yet, the question lingers. Did the man who gave the world so much love ever truly get to feel in return? Valerie June, the mysterious muse with a lost heart. Valerie June is less an artist and more a haunting dream you never quite wake from. With her untamed curls and a voice that drifts like smoke between folk and blues, she turns every note into a walk through memory's fields. But her magic isn't just in the music. It's in her courage to say what most would bury in silence. Once, she loved a woman, and she never wished it away. Born in Memphis in 1959 to a deeply conservative family, Valerie's childhood was wrapped in gospel hymns and scripture. Her father was a gospel musician, her mother a Bible teacher. Yet Valerie's greatest solace came not from sermons, but from stories, melodies, and a tender friendship with a girl named Rochelle. The two studied side by side, their afternoons filled with quiet laughter and harmonies. One day, Valerie poured her heart into a song called Apple Rain, pressed it onto a cassette, and gave it to Rochelle. But when Rochelle's mother discovered the tape, everything collapsed. Rochelle was torn from Valerie's life, sent to another school without explanation. Visits were forbidden. In an instant, love turned into exile. The blues became her refuge, the only place she could tell her truth without fear. Years later, when asked which of her songs carried the deepest truth, she gave a chilling answer, the one no one has ever heard, and the one that person no longer remembers. Valerie never married. She lives quietly now, raising dogs, tending her garden, still writing songs no one may ever hear. Her fans cherish her not just for her voice, but for the way she carries her wounds, like pressed flowers, fragile yet everlasting. And perhaps that is the heart of her story. A life well lived isn't about begging forgiveness from others. It's about learning to forgive the reckless beauty of your own youth and finding the courage to keep singing through the silence. Craig Seymour, the journalist who feared his own truth. For years, Craig's pen shaped the sound of R&B. He sat across from Mary J. Blige, Janet Jackson, and the greats, distilling their voices into unforgettable stories. He captured everyone's truth, except his own. Born in 1965 and raised in the South, Craig grew up in a world where boys were told not to cry and loving another man was a crime unspoken. He always knew who he was. But it wasn't until college that he finally let himself feel it, falling for a rising young singer after what began as a simple interview. For 3 hidden months, it was electric. Secret calls, stolen moments, a love too fragile to be seen. One night, Craig poured all into a blog post, masking his lover's name with a nickname. But one stray detail gave everything away. Friends whispered, rumors spread, and by morning, the singer was gone, ending it all with a single message. Fear of losing a career outweighed the risk of loving openly. Craig was left shattered, silenced yet again. But silence couldn't hold him forever. With raw courage, he wrote All I Could Bear, a memoir that ripped away every mask. His years as a critic, his nights stripping for survival, his journey through shame, desire, and self-acceptance. The book shocked readers, but also won respect for its fearless honesty. Today, Craig Seymour lives as a professor, still writing, still unafraid to challenge the narratives around Black culture, sexuality, and freedom. His life speaks a truth sharper than any review he ever wrote. Never apologize for who you love. The greatest tragedy isn't losing someone else. It's losing yourself by hiding from your own heart. Tracy Chapman, the singer for Silent Hearts. Tracy Chapman is the sound of quiet defiance. No scandals, no spotlight-hungry stunts, no desperate chase for fame. Just a woman, a guitar, and the kind of truths the world often tries to bury. Born in 1964 in Cleveland, Ohio, she grew up in a strict religious household where love had rules. One day, her mother found a stack of handwritten letters tucked away in a closet. Letters to another girl. There was no shouting, no punishment. Instead, her mother pressed a Bible into Tracy's hands and softly said, "God is still waiting for you." The subject was never spoken of again. At Tufts University, Tracy found her first real love. One snowy night, the two young women were seen walking hand in hand through a park, their laughter echoing in the cold air. By sunrise, the girl had disappeared from the dorms without a word, and Tracy never spoke of her again. Friends would later say that night was the last time they saw her smile with the innocent freedom of someone unafraid to be herself. Rumors later tied her heart to Alice Walker, the celebrated writer of The Color Purple. Walker dropped subtle hints in her autobiography, but Tracy never confirmed a thing. She never married, never labeled herself, never gave the world the explanations it craved. Instead, she gave them songs. Songs that whispered louder than any confession. Songs that carried the weight of invisible lives, unspoken truths, and silent longings. For countless people in the LGBTQ+ community, Tracy Chapman became an unlikely beacon. A reminder that love doesn't always need a label and resistance doesn't always need a shout. Sometimes all it takes is a sigh, a guitar, and a song to move an entire generation. Nedra Johnson, keeper of the forgotten notes. Nedra Johnson was never built for the spotlight of TV fame or Billboard charts. Her stage is smaller, but her impact runs deeper. She's the voice for those the world tries hardest to silence. A jazz soul singer, fiercely independent, openly lesbian, and unshakably herself. In other words, everything the mainstream music industry didn't want to touch. Born in 1966 to jazz legend Howard Johnson, music ran through her veins, but truth ran through her heart. Her family saw her identity early on. They didn't forbid it, but they didn't embrace it either. They just looked away. At 17, when she brought home her first love, a bass player named Mel, the dinner table froze in silence. Her mother scrubbed dishes without a word, and Mel never returned. The world outside wasn't any softer. At one LGBT performance, a conservative crowd booed her off the stage. But Nedra didn't break. She leaned into the microphone, her voice steady, and said, "I don't sing to be accepted. I sing because I can't be silent." Then, with fearless grace, she transformed their hate into a tender ballad. Today, she shares her life with her longtime partner. They've never signed a marriage certificate, but their bond is stitched into every note she sings and every quiet moment they share. To her audience, Nedra had become the keeper of forgotten voices, a living reminder that the quietest songs often carry the most powerful truths. Meshell Ndegeocello. Meshell Ndegeocello is the borderless soul of neo-soul, fearless, limitless, and unapologetically herself. She refuses to fit into anyone's box. No gender rules. No musical boundaries. No need for approval. Born in 1968 in Germany and raised in Washington, D.C., she became one of the first openly bisexual artists in black music, a bold truth that came at a heavy cost. Her family discovered it when she was still in high school. One afternoon, her younger brother walked in to find Meshell holding another girl's hand while soft music drifted in the background. No shouting followed, no dramatic confrontation. Just a silence that cut deeper than words, an invisible wall that slowly grew between them. Years later, Meshell would say she had to teach herself how to love without expecting to be understood. Her first great love was a woman, a brilliant sound engineer she met in the studio. The connection was real, electric, but her family's quiet disapproval hung over them like a shadow. The relationship unraveled after bitter arguments, not because the love wasn't strong, but because living their truth meant hurting the people they both longed to keep close. Today, Meshell has found peace. She lives openly with her wife and children, never begging for forgiveness, never chasing validation. Instead, she channels every heartbreak, every scar into her music. That's her quiet form of radical courage. Not revenge, not bitterness, but healing through sound. Darryl Stephens, the truth teller in an industry built on lies. Born in 1974, he broke into the spotlight through the groundbreaking series Noah's Arkansas. But long before the cameras found him, Darryl was chasing a very different dream. He wasn't just an aspiring actor. He was an R&B singer with a velvet-smooth voice and a presence that could electrify any stage. At home, his family always knew he was gay. Since high school, it was the unspoken truth, the kind that lingers in silence. In a conservative black household of that era, acceptance was complicated. His first great love was a respected studio singer, a relationship carried out in whispers and shadows. Then one night, fate turned cruel. Someone caught them sharing a kiss backstage. The warning came fast and brutal. If word got out, both of their careers would be finished. Faced with that impossible choice, Darryl walked away from music. He chose a world where he could finally breathe, where he wouldn't be forced to pretend. Acting. And in that world, he didn't just find success. He found freedom. Today, Darryl Stephens is far more than an actor. He's an activist, a voice for LGBTQ people of color, admired not for scandal or spectacle, but for his honesty. His legacy reminds us that kindness isn't always about pleasing others. Sometimes it's about courage, the courage to live as your authentic self, even when the world demands silence. Tona Brown, the voice history tried to silence. Born in 1979, Tona Brown carved her name into history as the first Black transgender woman ever performed for a U.S. president. But before the spotlight and ovations, there was only silence. As a child, she lived as Anthony, quiet, withdrawn, afraid to even look in the mirror. Her family couldn't understand. Her teachers wouldn't accept. And in church, when she cried for simply wanting to exist as herself, the pews stayed cold and unyielding. Her first taste of love came at music school. But when her truth was discovered, that love vanished overnight. No explanation, no goodbye. Heartbroken but not broken, Tona kept singing. Through chaos, transition, and doubt, she rose again, this time draped in a ball gown, her voice soaring, opera-fused R&B, raw, unapologetic, unforgettable. For the LGBT community, she became a beacon in an industry obsessed with perfection. Tona never begged for approval. She never apologized for being different. She simply stood on stage, her truth wrapped in music, reminding the world that every soul deserves to live in the body they believe is theirs. But not every wound makes the headlines. Some hide in the shadows of judgment, where Black LGBT artists have been silenced for generations. That's why their stories matter. When you hear them, listen with compassion. Choose empathy over prejudice. Because authenticity is not a privilege. It's a birthright. And as you walk beside these 21 brave voices, let your heart soften. Like, share, and add your truth in the comments below. Because real change doesn't begin with grand speeches. It begins when we dare to see each other, clearly, fully, and with kinder eyes.